Okay, so let me just get myself settled. Okay, so today we are talking about just pathways to AB 540, right? I think as folks know, AB 540 has been slowly expanding ever since it was first implemented in 2001. And so now more and more undocumented students, right, can pull in from their different academic different attendance and degree requirements that they have in order to qualify for the policy now. And even most recently, we did help at Immigrants Rising co-sponsor SB 1141 to remove that 2-year cap on community college credits. So now more undocumented students at a community college can actually benefit and use the whole 3 years that they had at that institution in order to meet qualifications. If you want to, we won't get too deeply into like the requirements of the law, right? I think a lot of folks here are pretty familiar, but we do have that really great quick guide that we can throw in the chat if you have not seen that yet. For the full requirements, this is also available in Spanish for folks to see that as well too, and as a resource for their Spanish speaking students and families. And I think, so when folks were registering for this session, right, we did pose that question. And even today, as we got started, we posed the questions of how folks support non-AB 540 students. And I think for the longest time, right, we always really uplifted scholarships and getting funding through scholarships as a way for folks to attend college, even attend and afford college, even if they don't qualify for AB 540. And this was also uplifted before things like the California Dream Act existed for undocumented students. And so I both want to uplift both our like resources on scholarships and also really want to like highlight for people to kind of check the unit requirements for their different scholarships on campus because sometimes those scholarships, right, have things like full-time attendance requirements, and thinking about what kind of barriers that can actually include for students who are paying these really expensive non-resident fees and having like a scholarship that requires them to go to school full-time actually may not be something that is supportive of them too, right? And so I think that with that too, another support that we've been giving here at Immigrants Rising for supporting non-AB 540 students is just making sure that they have a place to like track their progress in building towards AB 540. Folks, I think here have seen our attendance worksheet, and this worksheet includes places for students to both calculate their attendance and list their degree or transfer requirements, and kind of see what they have completed versus what they haven't, and what kind of plan that they need to make in order to build the eligibility in that way. It has a really great reminder about just submitting the AB 540 affidavits and any other documentation required, and just another reminder about the California Dream Act for folks to also take advantage of that if they are eligible for AB 540. And so I think with all of these in mind, it can still be really hard for students, obviously, right, to meet the requirements just because of those non-resident fees and the time it could take for them to kind of build those up as they're going through school. And so today we're actually going to be talking and highlighting just different policies that folks have had mostly at the California community colleges to help students build their eligibility. The first one is called Ed Code 76140, which actually allows non-resident students who are taking 6 units or less at a California community college to pay those in-state tuition rates. And then the other one we'll also be highlighting through our panel is SB 554, which also lets non-resident students who are in adult schools, who are working towards their GED or non-credit high school programs to take up to 11 units for free at the California community colleges also. And so I think with both of these, right, this really lets students kind of save that money and have a clear plan on how they can build those attendance and degree requirements for AB 540. I know our panelists might touch a little bit more on both of these, but these are both like need to be board approved district policies. And I think as folks kind of like alluded to in their check-in question today, it does really require like collaboration across campus or even across the district, and especially with admissions departments and feeder schools like high schools or adult schools or non-credit programs. And Nancy, I'll pass it on to you.
So we're super excited to have all of you here today. We're really excited that Mount Sacs here, that Cañada College and the San Mateo Community College District are here to talk about their work, but we are committed to expanding the number of all community colleges who can effectively implement these policies. I'm not sure if you, or if it's not you directly, somebody that you work with has received a copy of the survey that Immigrants Rising sent out last month. We want to make
Nancy, you got muted.
We want to make sure that we can go ahead and Madeline, can you go to the next part? I thought I was pushing my slide. Sorry, that's why. We want to build more pathways around AB 540 eligibility, but in order to do that, our team needs to better understand the current interest and implementation strategies, the interest around implementation, and also the future training needs to expand pathways. So we do have a survey. If you haven't done it yet, please go ahead and complete that. Madeline's going to put that onto the screen in terms of our a quick QR code that you can look at. If you have not yet completed the survey, please go ahead. If you did, only 26 colleges responded to our request. So even if you are not at a community college, if you know somebody around you, please hit them up. Hey, did you do this survey? We want to know more about that. And then in the next slide, we did find out a list that somebody had done that there are actually about 30 campuses that they said that had implemented 76-140, this rule that Madeline's talking about, this educational code that allows students to have 6 units or less pay non-resident fees, even if they don't have AB 540. But unfortunately, I think only 6 colleges responded to that. So there's a big difference, right? Did 30 actually implement it? Did 6? And so we need your help to identify schools to increase. We want to be just able to have a list, to be like, these are the schools that are doing it, especially now that students can take virtual, can take virtual classes. Like they could be going to another campus to build up some of their eligibility. We want to elevate promising practices and find out any challenges that were there in its adoption. So that we can, and then also let us know if there's other district solutions that you have. So this is an additional survey for those that have already implemented AB 540, implemented 76-140. So if you're on the call, please help spread the word. And if you're not the person at your campus, check it out with your feeder schools as well.
Yeah, thank you, Nancy. And we did just throw those links in the chat. We'll also share with everybody who registered on here. So if you didn't get a chance to grab it now, it'll be included in the follow-up email. But I think to Nancy's point too, and before we jump into like our panel, right, to hear how schools have actually implemented and worked with these policies, we do also want to uplift a couple of other solutions that other districts have come up with in more intentionally helping students build eligibility towards AB 540. And so the LA Community College districts actually implemented this board rule 8.100.15 that's very similar to Ed Code 76-140 that also allows non-resident students to actually to non-resident students to also pay
resident fees. Yeah, it's based on financial need.
Yes, to base on financial need. I was losing my words there for a second. So that's a specific board approved district-wide rule that LACCD has been using to also support those students. And then I know College of the Desert also has this pledge program, which is very similar to those promise programs that other campuses have, but this one is specific to students graduating from their community, also need to show financial need and does not have AB 540 as a requirement. And folks who are able to benefit from this also can get free tuition for 2 years within that campus. And so these are not going to be what we're talking about in our panels today, but I think these are kind of good examples and solutions to be aware of and to think about as folks are kind of exploring the different ways they are supporting non-AB 540 meet the eligibility requirements at their campuses. So I think with that, I will pass it along to just our panelists from today. They've introduced themselves earlier, but we have Dario Fernandez from the DREAM program at Mount San Antonio College, and then Nimsi Garcia, who's the DREAM Center coordinator at Cañada College. And I'll have them pull up on this. I think they're both showing their camera already. And so I'll have them maybe just kind of start with letting us know what policy it is that they've implemented on their campus and kind of how did they hear about that policy. Dario can maybe go first.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. Again, my name is Dario Fernandez. I serve as the director of the DREAM program at Mount San Antonio College. And I've been in this role since July of 2019. So it was very timely because I know I'll be speaking about SB 554, what we know on our campus as our adult education special admit program. Program that allows, students who are pursuing their GED or adult high school diploma to concurrently enroll in college credit courses up to 11 units. And so when I started, that was not in effect. That passed later in 2019. But we were seeing student cases, right? We were seeing student cases that didn't necessarily fit the clean alignment of like AB 540 and SB 68. So the natural kind of partnership that we have on the non-credit side with our School of Continuing Education, we're trying to kind of come up with solutions, right? Trying to come up with, especially with the SB 68 route, right? But also knowing that some of our students that came, at a later point maybe don't have nearly as much K through 12 or high school education attendance. It was going to take some time, right? It was going to take some time for them to become SB 68 eligible, and those conversations naturally led into the SB 554 policy and the language, and trying to figure out how do we make sense of this, right? Because it's a lot. We're trying to kind of start off with the AB 540, screen for SB 68, but then like if they're not, how do we plug them into a policy that's so new? How do we structure it? How is this going to work? And especially working with our admissions and records folks to make sure that the student is coded correctly, all the back end things that need to happen with our applications and things of that sort. So that's initially how I came to kind of know about the SB 554 adult education special admit program. And we started kind of working together with our partners, our educational advisors, our counselors on the non-credit side, especially in adult basic education. And also trying to see how we can loop in our ESL folks, right? Our ESL counselors, because many of our students could potentially benefit from also some of the ESL classes at the same time, because, right, while they may be through this particular policy be eligible to take college credit courses, we don't want to make the assumption that without the appropriate assessment from a counselor, right, to see where they would be at in terms of their English language fluency, how they would be able to take additional courses. So all those things were conversations that we were having with our folks in adult basic education, the School of Continuing Education. And that's how we kind of started to kind of brainstorm how to move this work forward, right? How do we make it something that's easily digestible for not only our staff that are going to be helping students, but also for the students, right? So that they understand what the pathway looks like.
Great. Thank you, Dario, for setting that up and how that came about on your campus. It already sounds like collaboration was a really key thing in getting this started on your campus. But I'll turn it over to Nimsi to maybe introduce the policy that they're working with on their campus, and then just to share how you all, if not yourself, but like how your campus kind of first heard about that policy itself. So the first question first.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Nimsi Garcia. I use the pronouns she, ella, and I'm the coordinator for DREAM Center at Cañada, which is part of the San Mateo Community College District. So I am part of one of our 3 campuses. I started my role last August, so 2022, but I've been in our college for some time, and I had been involved in our different initiatives and groups on our campus to support undocumented students. So I had heard inklings about wanting to implement Ed Code 76140 at our district, and all the different work and advocacy that was happening to implement that, or to try to get it to become board policy so that we could start to implement it for our students. And it wasn't until I really stepped into the role that I got a good view of all the different, all the work and all the advocacy that had been happening. There were previous coordinators who in our three campuses, Cañada College of San Mateo and Skyline College, had been advocating and pushing for this. And it really started with getting our three campuses together, having dialogue about what were some of the issues that we were facing, and trying to find ways to collaborate to tackle how we could advocate for this at a board and a district-wide level. So it took a lot of groundwork from previous coordinators and previous staff to really get this to come together, and then pushing for our administrators to really buy into it and to support it, and to have them be the voices with our different leaders to move this forward. And I think around 2020 was really when a lot of this work started taking traction, because we were starting to see steep enrollment declines. And so there was a lot of desire to explore, what can we do to bring students back? What can we do to bring in new students? And in that sense, there was, I guess, a lot of openness in our district to practices that may be able to help us increase enrollment. And specifically in San Mateo County, we have a pretty large undocumented community. And many of the students who came to our district did so through our adult schools. And many of them were not eligible for AB 540 because they hadn't gone through like the high school path, or they hadn't been at an adult school long enough. And being in community college was too expensive for them if they were paying as non-residents. So there were a lot of different factors that really came together that helped us communicate and advocate for implementing this Ed Code, and having this be something that we do for our undocumented students.
Great. Yeah, thank you so much, Nimsi. So I think, like, similar to what Dario was mentioning, right, that collaboration and just coming together as you know, as a group of folks in your district to better support undocumented students was really like the catalyst, or just like the igniting point, the step one that folks engaged with in your campus to get this Ed Code started. And I think it's also really important that you highlight that this kind of came about in 2020, right? There was previous efforts before to really get it going, but just like leveraging the messaging around falling enrollment rates and how can we like tangibly you know, solve this on our district, I think is a really good point to kind of think about when messaging how to, like, what benefits this policy will bring to our campus. So I think you both have kind of like touched upon it already, but like want to hear back again from Dario, just like what were the other steps it took for your campus to like finally implement 554, and you kind of touched about some of your key partners, but were there other folks involved? What were some of the strategies that you all drew on to like bring people in to champion this?
Yeah, so I think it's important to also kind of preface that the SB 554 mirrors the K through 12 special admit program, right? So there was already like a pre-existing kind of framework to kind of understand it. The idea was now, okay, well, it's not just the adult school here on our campus, right? It's local adult schools, right? We're trying to get a grasp of how we're going to do it here at Mount SAC. And then we start getting referrals from students that are interested, right? And doing that concurrent enrollment, but from our local adult schools. So we really had to really kind of have lots of working meetings and trying to kind of visualize and make sense out of all of this, right? What was going to be the flow chart? What was going to be the flow of the work? Who's it going to be handed off to, right? Something so new that needed to really be moving forward quickly and identifying the key partners, right? So one of the first things that we did was trying to, you know, centralize all the information, right? For the people that were going to be helping students in this particular way. So We put together an info sheet. We put together a flow chart, which is still, very much in draft form. We want to make sure that we, before we start using it widely, especially sending it out or making it available for students, that it's really clear and we're getting feedback from other folks, right? So tomorrow, actually, the counselors over in adult basic education and myself, we're going to be presenting at our adjunct counseling, a regularly occurring meeting about the adult special admit program, right? We've presented before on the ESL side, right? To let them know, right, about the special admit program, the importance of screening students for residency or future residency, because we know that typically that's not something that's as commonly discussed, right? In thinking about the student that is likely to transition to college, right? What would be their residency upon, transitioning, right? And the earlier we screen them, the better we are able to use that amazing and wonderful attendance worksheet that Immigrants Rising developed to really kind of see what they're missing, right? And then accommodate and assign subsequent kind of educational plans that account for those hours that are missing, that attendance record, and all those different things. So I think for us it was because there were so many folks that were gonna be part of this process. We needed to first visualize it, get the information down on paper. And so I would like to kind of share, if that's okay. I don't know if this is the time, just in the info sheet. Again, still very much in draft form, but I think it'll give us an idea. Let me know if y'all are able to see this. Yeah. So basically the idea, right? While the adult special admit program is available to any student, right? We know with the population that we work in the subgroup of our undocumented students, there's a special benefit for them, especially when they don't have a GED or a high school diploma yet, but are ready to take on college credit courses, right? And they feel ready to do so. Before the special admit program, and because we don't at Mount SAC, we don't have 76-140 implemented, the route would be that they would have to first meet the SB 68 requirements, right? And then transition to college. Well, they could do that with the special admit program, the adult special admit program, SB 554, they're able to do it concurrently. So we created this flow chart initially for our practitioners, right? For us to make sense and have a quick reference guide. Really breaking down why, the adult special admit program is a great pathway for some of our undocumented students. And really understanding, the eligibility criteria, what happens if you already have, a high school diploma. These were all informed by the common questions that we were seeing in student scenarios, and also some of the questions that we were getting from students, right? We plugged in the wonderful information from the Immigrants Rising materials, right, around AB 540, right, just to make sure that we're mirroring and using the information that's already there. And this was a key question, right? How does future AB 540 eligibility help me, right? So it might not be something that that's going to be impacting you right now or during the time that you're in the ASA program, but if your goal is to transition to college, then we should be screening you for that eligibility. Along with conversations about immigration status, right? And if you understand what your immigration status, if you don't have access to free legal services, right? That we connect you with them as well to make sure that you know where you stand in relation to all of that, right? Because there are instances where, we know that for some of our students, the immigration status is pretty fluid. So just because they might be in this situation right now, if they have a pending case, to really understand what that timeline is going to be, right? For the legal case that they might have open. And if that legal case allows them to establish residency, right? For tuition purposes at some point. So this is basically the information, right? First, it was developed for us, right? To make sense, to have a quick reference guide, to make sense of this new kind of program and policy. And for us to also be consistent, right? With the information that we were sharing with students, right? And so this was the information, but then many of us were visual. We're like, I need to see this, right? Like, what happens if we get a student, right? Like, what's the decision tree? What do we do, right? Again, this is still very much in draft form, but the idea is that, if a student is interested in obtaining a high school diploma or an equivalent, we screen them based on what their immigration status is originally, right? If they have an F1, that's just how it materialized here at Mount SAC. But eventually, if they answer, no, I'm not an F1 student, if they say, if they don't have a high school diploma or GED, and if they want to do so for free, then they are referred over to our adult basic education, which includes the adult high school diploma and GED and equivalencies. However, at that point, if they self-identify as undocumented, right, they are then also referred over to the DREAM program, because then they'll be screened for that eligibility, right? We'll have that conversation with them so that they can understand how it could potentially kind of inform them. And eventually they get routed back in order to kind of go through the adult ed special admit program, right? And the really cool thing about this is we were able to develop a smart sheet so that at any point that a student applies for the SB 554, the adult special admit program, myself as well as our educational advisor, we get an automatic email, right? So that we are able to provide that case management support for those students, and that we're working collaboratively with our non-credit partners to ensure that the students understand the information, that they understand the importance of it, but that also they know that when they transition, after they meet, right, SB 68 eligibility, that they are able to understand that it might impact them if they intend to transfer at a university, to a public university, CSU or UC, right? So these have been the documents that have been like super helpful for us to just make sense, right? Get on the same page with our partners. But again, these are still in development, right? These are still in development, and it might look different in the ways that different colleges might seek to implement SB 554. At our campus in particular, it just happens to be that the primary focus has been how to use it as an alternative pathway for our non-AB 540 eligible undocumented students who don't have a high school diploma or GED yet, right? And aligning, if they are in the concurrent enrollment program, right, that we're aligning their high school, if they're doing the high school diploma, that we're aligning the courses that they need with the college courses. So it's kind of like a two birds, one stone scenario.
Hey, thank you so much, Dario. I think that those visuals are also really great. I know you mentioned it's still in progress, but I think we have a couple of folks in the chat asking if that's something you can share out with people. So if that is, we can also include it with folks who registered for this too, or at least maybe a portion of it to give folks an idea of the visuals you all and the process you all are working with Mount SAC. So thank you for sharing that. I think that also I think it's also important to like uplift, right, that there was already an existing K through 12, I think you said, special admit program that exists within your district already, that you all kind of like leverage to get this special admit program going. And just the different like collaborations you brought in actually making sure that you're identifying and then informing students and other staff members on your college of this opportunity, like really shows I think the importance of collaboration in getting this out there, because it's great to get the policy implemented, but how are we also making sure that our students and our staff members who's helping our students know about it and people are actually benefiting from it? I know that there's a question in the chat. I'll ask you to hold it, Carrie. I'll come back to it, but I'll turn it back to Nimsi. And I know Dario started answering our second question, but I think for you too, to just kind of share a little bit more about the steps it took your district to implement. I know you started like touching upon that already. And are there other key partners you all drew from and just other strategies that you used in getting this policy approved in your district?
I think I started touching earlier on how I'm part of a 3-college district. And so one of the initial ways that we really started to get a lot of momentum was in having more collaborative meetings between the 3 coordinators and undocumented liaisons at all of our campuses, and eventually merging separate task forces and separate groups in each of our campuses together into one shared district undocumented student coalition. I think that one of the great benefits of creating such a collaborative body was that unfortunately, there were some administrators in some campuses that were more supportive of the work that we were doing than in others. And I say unfortunately because it should be the case at all of our campuses. But the benefit that had was that for administrators, they all held each other accountable to doing the work that they were supposed to do to support this initiative. And so in that sense, I think it really played to our advantage. Key administrators and key leaders that we had in this coalition included one of our vice chancellors in our district office, our vice presidents of student services, vice presidents of administrative services, and really importantly, our deans of enrollment services who, once we did all the advocacy work, and when I say we, I'm talking about our previous coordinators and all our different leaders. Once that advocacy work took place and our district board of trustees supported this policy, and we were talking about and going into the implementation process, our deans of enrollment services were really critical because eventually this becomes an admissions and records process. And so having someone who oversees that area take the lead and talk about implementation from what the form itself is going to look like, to what are the processes from our admissions and records team. So they were able to really strategically align those things and make sure that we addressed any barriers, questions, challenges that came up throughout that process. And when we were looking specifically at the form that we were creating, I can put our actual board policy in the chat if folks want to look at that. So we tried to keep it as broad as possible in order to ensure that as many students as possible or prospective students as possible were eligible for the waiver. We ended up calling it our 6 or fewer units non-resident tuition fee waiver, which I'll say is a long and complicated name, but our leaders felt it was really important to be specific, and also as we were developing the form, to have it be as simple as possible. It took a lot of back and forth between the folks doing the work with students, our undocumented liaisons, and our leaders, and making sure that we were streamlining the process, not just internally, so for the folks who are going to be processing the forms and doing all the background work, but also for students. So when it came to implementation, it also relied heavily in the coalition to have both sides of our institutions provide feedback about what made the most sense and what was going to be best as students and ourselves as we navigated and shared out information about this. So those were some of the things that kind of came into play as we were implementing the policy and as we were figuring out how it was going to work and what it was going to look like at our district and then in our individual campuses.
Yeah, thank you, Nimsi. And I think Dario kind of showed how they promote this out to their students and staff, right? I know you also shared some, you also have a material that you all kind of use in your district or in your campus that also promotes that. Would you mind kind of like going over some of that too?
Yeah, so when we first started implementing it, it was last fall. And it was shortly around the time that I was starting my role. I'll drop the flyer that we first used for marketing, and I will own that it was a very rough flyer. It was, we implemented it 1 week prior to the start of the semester, so we were really trying to retroactively reach students who might have registered and might be encountering barriers, and also throughout the enrollment process. What helped us out the most was word of mouth. And making sure that students were our biggest advocates and having them share information with their colleagues and not with their colleagues, with their peers, and using those types of networks. Fortunately, we have a lot of really active student leaders at all of our campuses, and in Cañada, we have a club that we utilize so that students could disseminate information to one another. And then we relied on other networks that we're a part of. So we have our district coalition, but in Cañada specifically, we also have a Dreamers Task Force, and that involves constituency from all of our college employees are invited and included in those meetings, but we also include community partners and we include students. So that was where we did a lot of the information sharing, explanation, answering questions, and throughout the process of figuring out what it was looking like and how we were going to message and communicate in that first semester, we then created an FAQs as well, which I will also add into the chat. We didn't specifically create a guide that shows like, you know, AB 540, all those different things. I think we tried to keep it as simple as possible. And specifically for the students who already knew that we're not AB 540 eligible, having a guide that kind of explains step by step. And sorry, everyone, I'm dropping a lot of links into the chat that explains step by step if you're a new undocumented student who's going to be applying for the 6 or fewer units non-resident tuition fee waiver, or if you're a continuing student, how you are going to navigate that process. I think one thing that you'll see in our flow chart is that we had a really positive complication, which was our free college initiative in our district, which is definitely a privilege. We're a basic aid district, but we have been able to implement that starting spring. So on top of this waiver, for students who live in our county, in San Mateo County, we're also able to cover additional costs. So we're not only waiving non-resident tuition fee and capital outlay fee, but we're now also able to waive their enrollment fees, and depending on how many units they're enrolling. So San Mateo County residents no longer have the 6-unit restriction. They can enroll in more than 6 units. So depending on how many units they're enrolling in, they have additional benefits. So as we're kind of navigating this process, as we're kind of understanding what this initiative is going to look like, we've been able to provide a lot more support. And so messaging has, again, really relied on the networks that we have, especially in our community. And I think I'm going a lot into the other question.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. I think that's also really great to see. I see flow charts are a really big help to both colleges, right? Best way to kind of like make the information like easier for all students to like really see, is this something for me? So thank you for just sharing all those links that you've had too. But I think I really want to just kind of uplift the point you made earlier about making sure admissions and leadership from enrollment and admissions were involved in this process early on, especially because at some point, right, this is a process that admission holds on the campus. And so how can they be involved early on and really like champion and push for this policy early on to get it going? And I think just some of these like messaging materials that you're providing also really shows kind of how you all are trying to reach students to like make it as simple as possible for them to understand that this is a policy that exists for you. And I think the point about like really drawing on both like student clubs, right, and just community organizations is good to remember, because sometimes students will never make it to our campuses, right? Will never make it to a person like you or to our dream centers. So how can they still be informed of these like opportunities for them, even if they never make it really to our campus yet? So really great to highlight both those points. So I think I just have a final question for both you and Dario. Like there's a lot more, right? And I'm sure that I really encourage folks here to like connect with either both of you to like kind of get more of like the nitty gritty details, but just advice, I think, is what I want to close this off. Like what advice do you have for other schools who are just getting started, who are maybe not working with some of the like the benefits that you all have at your different colleges, right? So what advice would you have for other campuses who want to get this policy implemented on their district or campus? And I'll go with Dario first.
Yeah, I think for me, I think what was helpful is that, and by the way, you know, while I would love to take credit for this amazing info worksheet and flowchart that we kind of collaborated on, this was completely led by the adult basic ed folks, right? So like, hey, how do we kind of help make this process easier? How do we help everybody understand? And so we provided feedback, but it came from them, right, to try to kind of understand. And I think that ownership was important. I think what was super helpful for me, and I think that the advice that I would give other campuses would be really kind of understand the policy inside and out, right? Because I think so often in spaces where there's going to be a conversation about how it's going to be implemented, sometimes it could be implemented in a very narrow way, right? Rather than being amplified in a broader way, right? And I think that unless you really kind of understand the policy, the language, as it is written, not as it is interpreted and communicated to us, right? But as it is written, then you can be, and to the extent that you're going to be in those spaces can help advocate, you could kind of help amplify that, right? By asking key questions. So I think that would be my biggest advice. And I think one of the things that I didn't share was just kind of some of the data that we captured for those students that had gone through the special admit program. So I'll just share this briefly because this was super important in terms of the outcomes, right? So it's like the significance of the policy, the implementation of it was super critical, making sense of it with the flow charts. But here are the outcomes, right? With the 26 students that have gone through the program in 22-23, the pass rate, right, is 94%, right? And they've taken 133 credit courses, right? Transfer level English and math, right? Knowing that that's the language of, many of our initiatives that are happening in community college, and the average GPA, right? So when we're talking about equity and access and students that would otherwise not be enrolled in college, this is kind of something that's powerful to kind of state when you're at those meetings and trying to advocate for another policy or a broader interpretation of another policy, because now we have data for students who otherwise would not have been there. But I think that only happens if we really know and understand the policy inside and out.
Great, thank you, Dario. Nimsi?
I think I started alluding to this in the beginning, but one of the things that really helped us in terms of adding that pressure for implementation was identifying this as a best practice for enrollment. If your campuses are facing issues with enrollment, I think having that communication really matters. But as you go into the work of implementation and interpreting the ed code or whichever policy you're looking into, I think that it's really important to have intentionality around the language that you use as you draft this policy, because it's going to go out and different people are going to interpret it their own way. So you have to be really intentional about the way that you are writing about it, talking about it, to ensure that interpretation is for the benefit of the students that you wish to serve, that we wish to serve. And that's been an iterative process for us. That's been something that we've had to learn and to go back into, and to be open to continuing to make revisions. In our Dream Center at Cañada, I am the one person in our center, and sometimes it feels a little lonely being a one-person team. But I know I'm not a one-person and team in our campus. I know that there's a lot of other folks who are really excited to and are really motivated to support undocumented students. So something that's been really important when it comes to advocating for undocumented students, to advocate for undocumented students, is utilizing my resources, utilizing my networks, and having other folks also use their voice to push for change and to push for implementation, and to make sure that we are student first, and that we're centering the voices, the experiences of our undocumented students, so that whatever we do end up implementing works best for them and them for us.
Great, thank you, Nimsi. Yeah, so I think a lot of similar things, right, to what Dario mentioned too, but just but you all have both mentioned throughout, right? Just the collaboration is really key. Who are those big allies who's gonna help you push this through? I think understanding that language, really, the policy, right? And finding a way to communicate that same policy to people with intentionality is also a really big part of it. And I think just the point that I think you both also really touched upon is enrollment is down everywhere for many people, across all systems, right, since the pandemic, especially for undocumented students. So how can we also use that urgency a little bit more to leverage really the need for policies like this? And I also really like the data points that Dario really showed, and I think I also heard this at a previous San Mateo district meeting, of these students were never gonna make it, or we're not really gonna make it to our campus, right? So if anything, these policies are actually bringing more students who may not have had access to us before into it. So I think that's also a really good, great messaging point to kind of uplift. So thank you both for everything that you shared. I know my brain is very full. I think I see like folks very intentionally listening, a lot of like appreciations for both of you in the chat, right? And thank you, Nancy, for also just capturing some of the key takeaways that both Nimsi and like Dario shared. Really appreciate all the work that you do on this on your campuses, and just like for taking the time to like share it with folks here today, right? I think undocumented student support really moves forward when we're not trying to reinvent the wheel, but when we're like learning and like replicating from each other. And so, yeah, I think I see a lot of that hopefully coming from this meeting today. And so I know we had time for Q&A, but I'm actually going to hold that a little bit. And I do want folks to kind of maybe just like reflect, unload, maybe like start to like brainstorm a little bit, just some of what came up for folks in our breakout rooms. And so I'm actually going to have us move into that. And we do have some guiding questions that I want folks to kind of like think about when they get into their breakout rooms. So let me pull that up. And then hopefully when we come back, we'll have some time to kind of like reflect on what came up for people and just maybe address some of those questions that are coming up, right? But as we go into our breakout rooms, I want folks to kind of think about just some of their key takeaways from both the presentation and the panel of today. Do you have already plans to engage your campus around these policies? Or is that kind of at work already on your campus? And what would support your work around implementing these policies? Is there additional resources or things like that that you want to see? So I think Nancy threw that in the chat. So we'll transition into those. For folks who have to leave, thank you so much for joining. We do hope to see you in the fall when we come back up. But we'll take about maybe I think let's say about 10 minutes to go into these breakout rooms, and then we'll come back. Thank you. I think this is everyone back from the breakout rooms. I hope everyone had a really good discussion. Yeah, I saw that we were all not rushing to get back from our breakout rooms, which is always a really great sign. I'm wondering if anybody is open to sharing what kind of came up for them in their breakout rooms, even if you didn't like answer the questions that were posed, right? Kind of like what were you all chatting about? Any new things that emerged? Any questions that emerged? Rosa?
I can share. It was interesting that he was in my
Oh, great.
room, my breaking room, and it was great continue the conversation with him because, you know, unfortunately, our students in the CSU system cannot benefit with this program. But I do get sometimes students coming to the Dream Center trying to apply for the university. Now I have a source. Mm-hmm. I can just send it to Dario, and I told him, I'm going to keep you information because especially we see an increase of adults coming back, you know, wanted to educate. And so, because in here I say, I'll send it to the community college and we are just, you know, across from each other. And then after that, they can transfer to our institution. But I think it's an amazing program, what they're doing. Madeline, do you know if there's any other community college around Costa LA, like LACCD or Pasadena, or is Los Angeles have this program beside Manzac? I asked him, he thinks that there's other programs in the CSU, but I don't know.
That's why we're working on getting people to fill out that survey so we can have a list, right?
Okay.
So I would definitely encourage you, if I send that list to you, can you send that list to your community colleges and be like, hey, have you filled this out yet? We'll send it in the follow-up email. Yeah,
but we do know that LACCD, as mentioned earlier, have that special like board policy that's also very similar. That includes, that's for students who also show financial need. Mm-hmm. So I think that's another thing to explore within your.
I work really close with the Dream Center. We do presentations for them. They usually do like a undocumented students week.
Right.
So I will contact them and at least, you know, because that's another college that really is our feeder school here to Costa LA.
Yeah, but I think your point about like this policy, right, doesn't apply to four-year universities, it doesn't apply to CSU and UCs, but students who are not AB 540 eligible are still coming to our campuses, right? Especially like non-traditional students. And so how can we still advise them and kind of give them that pathway to look into, even if they're not eligible to get into our like 4-year universities at the moment. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
And I see there's a comment in the chat about the information regarding, I'm guessing the AB 540 eligibility and status needs to start beginning at the K through 12. Counselors, administrators, and staff need to be more informed about these initiatives, and there's a lack of community cultural wealth. Yeah, I think that's a really great point, right? I think in thinking about like feeder schools, how can we also bring in those high schools and just even younger, like K through 12, for this to be part of the vocabulary, because there's still way too many people, way too many undocumented families, I think, in the state who are not aware of these policies and just think that there's nothing for students post like high school, right? And so how can some of that literacy like really start earlier, and how can we like work more closely with like our feeder schools, with community organizations who work with those feeder schools to make sure that they have this information too. Anybody else want to share what kind of came up for them, or any questions also that came? I know we kind of skipped that a little bit. Any questions that came up from the presentation that folks kind of want to uplift? Carrie, I think I saw you had a question earlier.
I did. Thank you. Dario, I was curious as to if you've gotten any pushback from the GED or high school diploma teachers with the adult school program of students kind of hanging out in GED, because we've implemented SB 554, and so we are having those that bridge over, but we also have those that are obviously trying to accrue the hours and credits or finish a certificate or something. And so some of our GED teachers are like, well, they're ready to test and they're ready to move on, but then I have to explain to them there's some special circumstances going on that, you know, that's why they're kind of in this dual enrollment kind of situation. So have you experienced that at all, or anybody else on the call?
Yeah, no, and thank you for bringing it up again, because I did see the question in the chat. So when we initially started, we started with a few students, and we ran into the issue where we couldn't, once they were enrolled, they were pursuing, you know, their college credit courses, because many times that's what they were intending, right? So then we shortly after that, we implemented the requirement that in order to transition in the adult special admit program to the next term, that you have to complete a minimum amount of hours towards your high school diploma or your GED, right? And so that was kind of like it's the carrot and the stick, right? Being able to kind of hold them accountable and saying you have to be making progress to both to the GED and high school diploma as well in order to continue in the status.
Thank you, Dario. Clemente, I see your hands up.
Yes, good morning. So one of the things that I share in the room was, and so basically when and I think Dario talked about equity and, you know, all that stuff. So I think we're getting to the point where the movement is getting so big that hopefully in the future we see that the AB 540 requirements are removed completely, and we just process this on these students just like every other student, right? A year and a half, and people from admissions will know what I'm talking about. That year and a half requirement for everybody else should be the one that any student, including documented students, should have to meet, period. None of these, you know, all these implementations, which are great, you know, SB 68, AB 2000 is wonderful, I love them, but I would love to see in the future that we remove all these things and just have all the students walk to the same pathway and not discriminate undocumented students and have them walk through these all other processes and options and all these, you know, new things. Again, it's going to get to the point where it's going to be so confusing that, you know, we're not going to be able to keep up. So just, you know, be equitable and just treat everybody the same. That was my 2 cents.
No, thank you, Clemente. Yeah, I think ideally it would be great if, yeah, like, no, there's not so many like different processes, right? Depending on who the student is. And how can we get to that point of like true equity actually in higher education? But you know, I think until then we do have these other things that we have to work with, and how can we like equip ourselves with this knowledge to make sure that we're supporting our students given the current landscape and everything. Yeah, thank you. Juliana?
question is to ask the people here at the adult school. So with students doing dual enrollment, so students with our undocumented students, sometimes we do dual enrollment so they could get those hours faster. However, one of the things was like at MPC, you can be enrolled in non-credit courses like ESL courses and enrolled in regular units. So now what I have to tell my students is like from level, like, so say that ESL, you would have to get to a level 5 to be able to take regular classes. So then students are like a little bit like, they already surpassed the ESL classes at the adult school. So that one makes it hard. What are some classes, non-credit classes that they could take at the adult school or the adult school could offer to students? I know we started doing some more computer classes, but in your adult schools, is there any other classes that you guys are teaching so the students don't have to just depend on ESL? Because that's where our barrier comes, that our students end up taking the courses that they took, like credits from their home country high school, because they'll be able to get some credits from the high school, but then they won't be eligible for dual enrollment no more because they have the high school diploma.
Yeah. Is there anybody on the call who can answer that? Yeah, Carrie?
Hi, I'm with Mount San Jacinto College, and I'm with the adult education non-credit department with our college. The other classes that we offer to accrue hours towards the AB 540, and most of them are tied to our credit classes. So it's the foundation, but we have an introduction to child development, a business communications, digital communications, automotive, culinary, I think I'm covering all of them. We're looking at bringing a couple other on, and then our partners of the other adult schools in our area are also having different programs as well. Oh, construction. We have a construction class as well. So those are some of the classes that they can take that would then help them accrue their hours towards AB 540 from us.
Great.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, and maybe a point of like, maybe you two can also connect further if you did not get a chance to do that, right? Beyond this meeting.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, I think that last point, right, is also a really great point to end on just like cross-campus collaboration, right? And somebody out there kind of has a solution to some of the challenges that you all are facing. So how can we kind of like take the time to also just connect with each other, investigate maybe some of the policies that was shared today, connect directly with Nimsi and Dario later to investigate or to explore more like what is it going to take to implement these policies on our campus. So I think with that, I'm going to start transitioning us out. Thank you so much for everybody who's here until the very end, and to our amazing panelists, Dario and Nimsi, please throw them some more like love or just like affirmations, appreciations in the chat. And I think as we close out, we do just want to hear what you're taking from the room or from the meeting today with you all. We have this one final Mentimeter for folks to just share one word of what you're taking from the meeting, and you go to that same link with that same code to let us know your one word. And I'm just going to pull that up so we can take a quick look at it. It should not be this one. It should be this one. So just one word that you're taking from the space. I'll wait for a couple of responses. I think Nancy threw that link in the chat. So opportunity, community, partnerships, collaboration, great. Couple more, 554. Information, good. Wait one more minute. Collaboration's really big, good. Yeah, I think both of our speakers and everybody, I think, is like really leaning onto collaboration to like improve this work. AB 540 is really confusing. Becoming eligible for AB 540 is really confusing. And so how can we draw on like collaborations and the strengths of different people in our campuses and our departments to really present a pathway and like an opportunity for these students. So go ahead and get any final words in if you did not get a chance to do that. But as we transition out, I do want to share the contact information of both our panelists today. Dario and Nimsi, again, please reach out to them. I know that they would want to share and want to make sure that these policies are implemented across California. And we will also work to share some of those resources they shared with us. And then if you have any questions for Nancy or myself, our contact information is there too. But again, thank you so much for everybody being here. I really love this space and just getting together and hearing what folks are doing from across the state, because we don't have the opportunity to travel to all your campuses, right? And so I think just this month, this monthly space and getting to connect with you all has been a real pleasure. I'm excited to get us started again in the fall, and we'll see you all soon. Take care, everybody, and happy graduation to everybody who's celebrating or has celebrated graduations already. We'll see you all soon.
Thanks, everyone. Happy graduation. Happy May.
Thank you,
Happy
Dario.
implementation.
Thank you, Nimsi. See y'all soon.